was to think of Her Majesty the Queen and to feel a deep sense of sympathy and compassion for her and for the whole family at the loss of such a gigantic figure, particularly in her own life, married for well over 70 years, 73 years. I think I heard today that there's only 5% of the population who were alive, who have been alive longer than the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh have known each other. So that was my first thought. I think, secondly, to feel an extraordinary sense of what a remarkable life. What a wonderful life of service, of duty, of service to his country, service to the crown, but with this formidable intelligence, insight, and a really extraordinary prophetic gift.
You've met him in your role as Archbishop. What impression did you have of him from those meetings?
Well, I think, as I say, the impression that comes across most clearly is of a man of profound intelligence. Very practical, extremely down to earth. But the moment you were into a conversation with him, you began to realize how widely he'd read, how deeply he thought, and in particular in conversations I had with him, how deeply he thought about issues of theology. But also the distinctive thing, which I think has been coming out in a number of things people have been saying today, is he had an almost prophetic gift of being not just a few years ahead of the curve, but in so many areas, whole decades ahead, quarter of a century, half a century ahead, on issues like conservation, issues like climate change, interfaith dialogue, motivation for young people. I mean, he was talking about it when he was being laughed at for it. And half a century later, people are saying, oh, it's really important. Don't know why nobody thought of it before. He thought of it before.
You mentioned interfaith relations. He was a man of faith as well.
He was a man of very profound faith. I preached in front of him on more than one occasion, and you knew that one of the most interesting bits of preaching when he was present was the questions you'd get from him afterwards, which showed that he paid intense attention. And he would push back and question and examine in a way that wasn't intimidating, but was really had you on your toes. This was a man who thought profoundly about his faith, and it was a very deep faith, a very solid faith. And when we talk about interfaith, he would communicate superbly with people of other faiths without any compromise to his Christian commitment.
There are a lot of tributes today to his character, and you said in your statement earlier today that he was an outstanding example of Christian service.
Yes. There's a theme that runs through the words of Jesus Christ, which is summed up in something he said, Jesus said. If anyone wants to be my disciple, they must take up their cross and follow me. Prince Philip literally followed the Queen. Always a couple of paces behind. That's how it is. That sense of following while bearing, at times I suspect that I don't get this firsthand, but from other things he said, the quite considerable burden of never being the number one is an extraordinary sign of disciplined humility when your talents are that great, combined with just following what was right, and in his faith following Christ as he followed the Queen.
You mentioned the longevity of his service. What would you say to those who feel shocked and perhaps a bit unstable as a result of the news today?
I would say it's Easter time. And at Easter we remember above all the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ was raised by God from the dead. Death is not the end. There is something enormously impressive about a life lived well and ended well. And Prince Philip sums up a life lived well and ended well.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, there with his thoughts about the Duke of Edinburgh, his life and his legacy. Well, if you are just joining us, we are broadcasting a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." This is a BBC News special programme following the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. Prince Philip was by far the longest-serving consort in British history, a role that he shaped from the start.
Try and grow into it, and that was by trial and error. There was no precedent. But if I asked somebody what you expect me to do, they all looked blank. They had no idea. Nobody had much idea.
He was 26 when he married the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Within 5 years, she would be Queen.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Tributes to the Duke and messages of condolence to the Queen have been sent from leaders around the world, including here in the UK.
We mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
In recent years, there'd been signs that Prince Philip's health was declining. He'd been admitted to hospital a number of times throughout the last decade. He recently returned home to Windsor on the 16th of March after a month-long stay in hospital. His loss will be felt most keenly by the Queen, his family, and beyond. People have been laying flowers outside the gates of Windsor Castle, where the Duke passed away peacefully this morning. The flag is flying at half-mast at Buckingham Palace. Prince Philip's funeral will take place at St George's Chapel in Windsor. We'll be reflecting on his extraordinary life of service and of duty. Hello, if you are just joining us, we are broadcasting a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." We will have continuing coverage and tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, but first, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell looks back at his long and eventful life.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. In the name
At
of
the
God.
Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you, live and die,
And so,
against all manner of
rising, touches the crown upon her head and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. Philip had a rootless childhood. His family was banished from Greece, his parents separated, and he was sent to Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The Spartan atmosphere there suited him. As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. Philip served in the Royal Navy with distinction during the war. When the fighting ended, he started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announce the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.N.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip. I, Philip. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexander Mary. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexander Mary. To my wedded wife. To my wedded wife.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him. They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long, convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had completed their family with 2 more children, Andrew and Edward, who joined Charles and Anne, and he had found a new role for himself.
Is it the 18th we're due back now?